I woke up 4 minutes before my alarm clock rang, as I had done for the past 28 years. 5:30 in the morning. Darkness outside the window, only sparse streetlights illuminating the deserted streets of Boston. Gwen was still asleep, curled up on her side of the bed. I carefully slipped out from under the covers, careful not to disturb her. My morning routine had been perfected over the years to the point of automaticity. Contrast shower, shave, 7 strokes for the left cheek, 9 for the right, coffee, 2 spoonfuls of Arabica, half a spoonful of Robusta. Black suit, navy blue tie, briefcase checked from the evening before. In my pocket, a notebook with a Parker pen, a gift from Gwen for our 20th anniversary. Before leaving, I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. Keith Mortimer, 58, CTO of Axiom Capital. The gray on his temples was more visible, the wrinkles deeper, but his gaze was still the same attentive, assessing. I adjusted my tie and went outside. At 6:15, I was already in the office. The guard, Ted, nodded at me as he always did. "Good morning, Mr. Mortimer. First up again?" "The usual, Ted," I smiled. "How's the daughter? She got in?" "Yeah. Can you believe it? Stanford." His face lit up. "I told you. She's a smart girl." I went up to the 24th floor and turned on the lights in the empty office. People wouldn't start pulling in until an hour and a half later. That time was mine. Silence, only the hum of servers in the next room. I loved these mornings the most. No calls, no meetings, just me and the code. The first thing I did was check the Axiom Nexus system. My brainchild, my pride. 28 years ago, when I joined the company, we were using primitive spreadsheets. Now it was a powerful analytics platform, processing millions of transactions and predicting market trends with an accuracy that competitors could only dream of. I opened the admin panel and ran a daily check. One by one, the green indicators confirmed that the system was running smoothly. I entered a secret code, a combination of Gwen's birthday and our wedding date, to update key security settings. No one but me knew about this daily procedure. There was no mention of it in the documentation. It was my insurance against the unexpected. By 8 o'clock, the office began to fill up. First the junior analysts, then the middle managers, and by 9, the department heads. I nodded to the incoming people, but I didn't start any conversations. Everyone knew Mr. Mortimer was not a fan of small talk. At 9:30, my phone rang. The internal number for Lawrence Price, the CEO. "Keith, come in here, please." His voice sounded unusually strained. "Right away." "Of course, Lawrence. I'm on my way." Something was wrong. Usually our meetings were scheduled in advance, and Lawrence never said please for no particular reason. I went up to the 25th floor. Price's secretary, Emily, gave me a strange look and led me straight into the office. Lawrence sat behind his huge mahogany desk. Next to it stood a young man I'd seen a couple times at corporate events, Dwight Abbott, head of innovation, a recent acquisition, 30-something, fancy suit, expensive watch, cocky smile. "Have a seat, Keith." Lawrence pointed to the chair in front of the desk. He was fiddling with his cufflinks, a sure sign that the conversation would be unpleasant. "I won't beat around the bush," he began, looking me straight in the eye. "The board of directors has decided to restructure the technical department. We believe the company needs a fresh look, new ideas, a modern approach." I remained silent, watching his fingers nervously twist a gold cufflink. "Dwight will take over as CTO starting tomorrow." Silence hung in the office. I felt something cold inside, but outwardly I remained calm. "We certainly appreciate your input, Keith," Lawrence continued. 28 years is a considerable amount of time. You'll get a full retirement package and a long service bonus." "And when did you make that decision?" I asked quietly. "Finalized? Yesterday, in a closed board meeting." "But discussions had been going on for the last few months." I nodded. "So while I was working on perfecting the system for the deal with the Asian investors, they were planning my replacement." I hope you'll help Dwight with the transition. Lawrence finally stopped fiddling with his cufflink. Bring him up to speed. Tell him about the system. Today will be your last day on the job. Mr. Mortimer, I've long admired your work. The Axiom Nexus is an outstanding system, but I have ideas for making it even better, integrating machine learning, neural networks. I raised my hand, stopping the flow of words. The system has been using machine learning elements since 2010, neural networks since 2015, I said in a steady voice. But keep going. I'm interested in hearing your ideas. Dwight hesitated for a moment, but quickly came to his senses. Of course, I meant more modern architecture, transformers, attention to market anomalies. I see. I turned to Lawrence. Well, if the decision is made, I'll conduct the handover today. Anything else? Lawrence looked surprised by my restrained response. No, that's all. Thank you for your understanding, Keith. I stood up and headed for the door. Yes, one more thing, Lawrence added. The deal with the Eastern Investment Group for $100 million. Is it still on? Is the system ready for tomorrow? Everything is ready, I answered. If protocol is followed, there won't be any problems. When I returned to my office, I found Veronica Stein waiting outside my office. Our CFO always knew everything before anyone else. Is it true? She asked quietly when we got inside. Yes, last day. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. Dwight Abbott is my successor. Veronica shook her head. Damn idiot. Lawrence, not you, she added quickly. Abbott is good at presentations and innovation talk, but he has no clue about the actual architecture of the system. Now that's not my problem. I started gathering documents to hand over. What about the deal? Tomorrow is the final approval with the Asians. $100 million, Keith. It's the biggest deal in the last 5 years. I looked at her. The system's set up. If Dwight doesn't mess with it, everything will go smoothly. Veronica sighed and sat down across from me. Remember when we started? 2005, the financial crisis was looming, and we were creating a system that could predict it. I remember, I smiled. You were the only one who believed my idea would work. And it did. Veronica pulled out a notebook and began making notes in the margins in her own small handwriting. Lawrence had never realized how much more complicated the Nexus was than it seemed. To him, it was just a computer thing that makes money. Maybe he's right, and we need a fresh set of eyes, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. Veronica snorted. Don't pretend this doesn't bother you, Keith. I know you too well. 28 years, and the day before you retire. She didn't finish the sentence. There was a knock on the door. Dwight Abbott, already looking like the master of the situation. Mr. Mortimer, I'm ready to begin the handover process. I'm on a tight schedule, so let's not take too long. Veronica rolled her eyes and walked out, giving Dwight a disparaging look. I spent the next 6 hours explaining the basics of the system to Dwight. He kept interrupting, demonstrating his knowledge, but I could see he was slipping on the surface. The Nexus was like an iceberg, 10% visible code and 90% hidden logic that I'd spent years developing. What's that module? Dwight pointed to the screen where one of the system's critical components was displayed. That's the heart of transaction security, I explained. It checks the integrity of the data before every major transaction. If there's an error here, the entire transaction is blocked. It looks outdated, Dwight shook his head. I think we can optimize this code, make it more elegant. I didn't say anything. This module had a daily parameter update that no one knew about. If Dwight started optimizing it, the system might crash at the first major load. By 5 p.m., my desk was empty. 28 years of work fit into one box of personal belongings. Dwight was already sitting in my chair, reviewing documentation. I think we've covered everything, I said, standing up. If you have any questions, I can handle it. Dwight didn't even look up from the screen. The system isn't as complicated as it looks at first glance. At that moment, a notification appeared on the screen that the security settings had to be updated. Dwight frowned. "What's that?" "The daily security update," I said. "Just click confirm." Dwight clicked the button, but the system asked for an authorization code. "What code?" "It should be in the documentation," I shrugged. "Must have been an oversight. In fact, it was the secret code that only I knew. Without it, at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, when preparations for the deal with the Asians began, the system would detect a mismatch in the security parameters and block the transaction." "That's odd." Dwight frowned even more. "I'll look through the code and find where it says that." "Good luck." I picked up the box of stuff. Well, it was time to say goodbye. I walked around the office shaking hands with my co-workers. Most of them expressed regret. Some were genuinely upset. Others studiously avoided my gaze. That's corporate life. Today you are irreplaceable. Tomorrow you are forgotten. The last person I saw was Veronica. She was standing by the window looking out at the evening Boston skyline. "I can't believe they did this to you," she said quietly. "Business is business," I replied. "It's nothing personal." "It is personal to me." Veronica turned to me. "You created a system that makes the company millions. Without you, they can handle it," I smiled. "They have Dwight and his innovations." "Keith," Veronica lowered her voice, "you know that tomorrow's deal is critical, right? If something goes wrong, everything will be fine." I put my hand on her shoulder. "As long as protocol is followed." We both knew that Dwight wasn't likely to follow a protocol he didn't understand. "Call me tomorrow," Veronica said. "At least to tell me how things are going." "I will." I nodded, though I'd already decided I wasn't going to do that. For 28 years I'd been part of the system. Now I was coming out of it. I walked down the hall. Ted was still at his post. "Leaving, Mr. Mortimer? It's a little early for you." "Yes, Ted. Today's my last day." "Your last?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "But I thought you were going to work more before you retired." "Plans have changed." I held out my hand to him. "Take care of yourself, Ted." "You too, sir." He shook my hand firmly. "We'll miss you." I took a deep breath of the evening air as I stepped outside. It was a strange feeling knowing that tomorrow you had nowhere to go, nowhere to hurry. 28 years of the same road was over. I pulled out my phone and dialed Gwen's number. "Hi, honey." "Yeah, I'm on my way home." "Early?" "Yeah, I've got some news. I'll tell you when I see you." As I finished talking, I took one last look at the Axiom Capitol building. 25 stories of glass and concrete where most of my life had been spent. I felt no anger or resentment, only a quiet confidence that the system was working exactly as it should. I got in my car and drove home, leaving behind not only the building but also a part of myself. Keith Mortimer, Axiom Capital's CTO, had ceased to exist. Who I would become tomorrow was another question. When I entered the house, the aroma of homemade baked goods instantly enveloped me. Gwen always made something special when she felt the day was going to be challenging. It was amazing how well she read the situation even from a distance. "Keith?" Her voice came from the kitchen. "You're early. Did something happen?" I walked into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Gwen was standing at the stove, stirring something in a pot. Her graying hair was gathered into a careless bun, reading glasses on her nose. She turned around and the wrinkles around her eyes became more visible, a sure sign of worry. "I got fired," I said simply. Gwen froze for a moment, then turned off the stove and walked over to me. "Fired? You? After 28 years?" I nodded, setting the box of stuff on the chair. "Restructuring, a fresh look, a modern approach, all standard phrases." "Sit down," Gwen pointed to the kitchen table. "I'll make you some tea. It was our ritual in difficult moments. Strong tea with bergamot." Gwen took out a special tin of brew, kept for special occasions. "Who will take your place?" she asked. putting the kettle on. Dwight Abbott, young professional, 32 years old, full of innovative ideas. Gwen snorted. Does he have any idea what he's dealing with? No. I rubbed my eyes tiredly. He thinks the Nexus is just another computer system that can be optimized in a couple of weeks. The kettle whistled. Gwen poured boiling water over the brew and set the cup in front of me. Tell me everything. She sat down across from me, resting her hand on my palm. I told her about the conversation with Lawrence, about the reaction of my colleagues, about Dwight's self-assuredness, about the upcoming deal with Asian investors. Gwen listened in silence, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. So, tomorrow is the big deal, she said at last. $100 million, and the system could fail because of a code that only you know about? Yes, I sipped my tea. Daily security updates. I never included it in the official documentation. It was, insurance. Insurance against what? Gwen frowned. I paused, searching for words. From what happened today? The fact that one day I might be discarded like a piece of junk. Gwen shook her head. Did you see that coming? Not specifically this, I shrugged. But in the corporate world, you always have to have an ace up your sleeve. Remember the year 2011, when Lawrence tried to sell the company to those venture capitalists in Seattle? Sure, Gwen nodded. You worked for a month without a day off to prove that the system was worth more than they were offering. That's right, and I did it. The stock soared 30%, the deal fell through, and a year later Lawrence got $1 million bonus for strategic leadership. I set my cup aside and walked to the window. Our house was in a quiet suburb of Boston with a small garden and a view of the park. Nothing extravagant. Gwen and I had always been practical people. Do you remember the crisis of 2008? I continued. When all the financial companies collapsed one after another. How to forget? Gwen came and stood next to me. You modified the system then so that it could predict risky assets. 3 months of work, I nodded. Axiom not only survived, but capitalized on the crisis. And what did I get? A commendation from the board of directors and a bonus equal to a month's salary. Gwen put her arm around my shoulders. You always valued work over recognition. Yes, I sighed. But today, I realized that to them I had always been just a function. A screw that could be replaced when it was no longer fashionable. My phone rang. Veronica Stein's name popped up on the screen. I need to take this, I said to Gwen. It's Veronica. I walked out into the living room and took the call. Keith, Veronica's voice sounded strained. I'm sorry to bother you tonight, but there's something I have to tell you. I'm listening. I just had a meeting with Lawrence and the board of directors. Tomorrow's deal with Eastern Investment Group. It's a lot bigger than we thought. I sat back in my chair, putting it on speakerphone so Gwen could hear too. How much more important? Critically important, Veronica lowered her voice. The company's been having liquidity problems for the last 6 months. We've been losing market share and several major clients have left for competitors. If the deal falls through, we'll face serious layoffs, maybe even the sale of some assets. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about what I'd heard. And that's why they decided to replace me? In the middle of a crisis? It was Lawrence's idea, Veronica sighed. He convinced the board that they needed a breakthrough approach, that your methods were too conservative, that Dwight could attract new investors with his energy and modern ideas. I see, I looked at Gwen, who was listening with concern in her eyes. What do you know about the deal tomorrow? The details are kept secret even from me, Veronica answered. All I know is that it involves buying a controlling stake in a technology company in Singapore. The deal is supposed to go through the Nexus tomorrow at 9 a.m. our time. That would be evening in Asia. And Dwight? How's he doing? Veronica hummed. He spent the last 2 hours trying to figure out that security notification. Can't figure out why the system requires some code that isn't in the documentation. I closed my eyes. This was exactly what I was expecting. Keith, Veronica's voice turned serious. I know you've been treated unfairly, but this deal tomorrow, hundreds of people's jobs depend on it. If you know something important about the system that can help— I'm sorry, Veronica, I interrupted her. But like you said, I was fired. I'm no longer part of the company. But you created this system. 28 years. Exactly. 28 years I gave Axiom Capital, and the day before I retired, they threw me out like a used napkin. There was silence on the line. I understand, Veronica said at last. If I were you, I'd feel the same way. But think about it, okay? If you change your mind, call me. Anytime. Good night, Veronica. I ended the call and turned to Gwen. What are you going to do? She asked. Nothing, I shrugged. Absolutely nothing. Gwen looked at me carefully. Are you sure? We're talking hundreds of jobs out there. Has anyone thought about me? I stood up and started pacing the room. 28 years, Gwen. I've missed our kids' birthdays, our anniversaries. Remember when you had that concert at the university? I couldn't make it because Lawrence needed to finalize the system for the investor presentation. I remember, Gwen answered quietly. And now that I'm almost at the finish line, I didn't finish my sentence and slumped back in my chair. Gwen came over and sat next to me. What exactly is going to happen tomorrow if you don't intervene? I rubbed the bridge of my nose, trying to formulate as precisely as possible. The Nexus system requires that certain security parameters be updated daily. Without it, it blocks any major transactions as potentially dangerous. The update requires a special code that only I know. It's not written down anywhere. And without that code, the transaction will fail? Yes, the system simply won't let a transaction of that size through without a security confirmation. Gwen thought, what if you called and just told me the code? I could, I nodded. But why? They'd made it clear they didn't need me anymore. Let their new genius deal with it. In principle, you can enter without the code, a specialist. It's just faster and easier with the code. Keith, Gwen took my hand. I've known you for 30 years. You've always been a responsible person. You've always done what was right, even if it wasn't good for you. I looked at her. Maybe it's time to think about yourself. About us? Gwen smiled. I'm not saying you should save the company. I just want you to make a decision that you won't regret in a week or a month. I stood up and walked over to the bookcase where the pictures of our family stood. 3 decades of life in snapshots. Our wedding, the birth of our children, their graduations, our first granddaughter, and among them, photos from Axiom Capital's corporate events, Christmas parties, summer picnics, award ceremonies. At one of them, I stood next to Lawrence, both of us 20 years younger. We were smiling, holding the award for Innovative Solution of the Year. I believed then that we were building something meaningful together. You know what the most frustrating thing is? I said without turning around. It's not that I got fired. It's the way they did it. No respect for my years of service. No thanks. Just thanks next. Gwen walked over and stood next to me. You have a right to be angry. I'm not even mad, I shook my head. I'm just disappointed. In people, in the system, in myself. I created a program that made the company millions, but I forgot to program basic human respect. I returned to my chair and turned on my laptop. Gwen watched me silently. What are you doing? She finally asked. Checking the status of the system, I answered. I still had remote access to the main settings. I guess the IT department hasn't gotten the order to lock my account yet. The familiar Nexus control panel appeared on the screen. All the lights were green except for one. The security settings needed updating. That's it. I pointed to the blinking red light. Without an update, the system won't miss the trade tomorrow. So what's your solution? Gwen put her hand on my shoulder. I stared at the screen where my system, my brainchild, the result of 28 years of work, was waiting for my decision. One keystroke and everything would work like clockwork, or I could just close the laptop and let events take their course. "You know," I said, slowly closing the laptop lid, "over the years I've been part of the system. I've obeyed the rules, contributed, believed in the common goal. But today, it was made clear to me that I was no longer needed by the system." I turned to Gwen. "So I'm just getting out of it. Completely. Completely. Are you sure?" There was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. "Yes," I nodded. "Let Dwight Abbott prove that he's really as good as he thinks he is. Let Lawrence explain to the board why he decided to replace me right before a critical deal. What about the people who might lose their jobs?" I was quiet for a moment, pondering the question. "I feel sorry for them. I really am. But I can't be held responsible for management's decisions. If the company collapses because of one deal, then the problem started long before today." Gwen nodded. "Good. I'll support whatever decision you make." She kissed me on the cheek and headed for the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. And Keith? Yes? Welcome to your new life." I smiled and took another look at the closed laptop. Somewhere out there in the digital world, my system was preparing for tomorrow. Without daily updates, it would do what it was designed to do: protect the company from potentially dangerous transactions. The irony was that right now, that protection could be the cause of collapse. The phone rang again. Dwight Abbott. I stared at the screen until the call stopped. After a minute, a message came through. "Mr. Mortimer, there is an urgent system issue. Please call back." I turned the phone off and put it in my desk drawer. For 28 years I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But not today. Today I finally logged out. I woke up to an insistent buzzing. I didn't immediately realize it was my phone vibrating in the desk drawer where I'd put it away last night. The clock read 8:30 in the morning, 2 hours later than I'd been waking up for the past 28 years. An unaccustomed luxury, but my body's inertia woke me up early anyway. Gwen wasn't around anymore. The aroma of fresh coffee and toast wafted from the kitchen. I stretched and listened to the vibration. The sound grew louder, as if someone was persistently trying to reach me, time after time. Curiosity got the best of me. I stood up, walked over to the desk, and opened the drawer. The phone screen glowed with notifications. 27 missed calls, 32 messages. Most from Veronica, a few from Dwight, 3 from Lawrence Price himself. I turned the phone on, and it immediately burst into a new trill. "Veronica, 8:31 in the morning." I didn't answer, but I opened the messages. The first was from Veronica, sent at 6:15 a.m. "Keith, call me back urgently. System problems." The next, 6:30. "Nexus is blocking preparations for the deal. Dwight can't figure out the security settings." 7:10 from Dwight. "Mr. Mortimer, critical situation. The system requires an authorization code for a security update. There's nothing in the documentation." 7:45 from Lawrence. "Keith, I understand how you feel, but this is about the future of the company. Please respond to Veronica." 8:15, again from Veronica. "Keith, the investors are waiting. If the deal doesn't start at 9, they may back out. Please help." I put the phone on the desk and walked to the window. It was a clear, sunny morning. Next door, Mrs. Patterson was watering the flowers. The mailman was delivering mail. A typical day in the Boston suburbs. 20 minutes away, in the Axiom Capital skyscraper, a real crisis was unfolding. "Is it ringing?" Gwen was standing in the doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "Yes." I nodded, accepting the cup. As expected, the system had blocked the preparations for the deal. "So, what are you going to do?" She took a seat on the edge of the bed. I sipped my coffee and felt a warm bitterness spread through my body. "Nothing. I told you yesterday. I logged out. The phone rang again. This time it was Lawrence in person. I looked at the screen, but didn't pick up. Don't you at least want to know what's going on? Gwen asked. I wondered. Professional curiosity struggled with resentment and principle. I pressed the speakerphone button and answered. Yes, Keith, finally. Veronica sounded desperate. We need you. It's urgent. What's wrong? I asked, even though I knew the answer. The system won't skip the preparation for the deal with the Asians. Requires an update. Dwight is trying to bypass the blockage, but it's only making things worse. Lawrence is furious. I remained silent, looking at Gwen. She didn't say a word, but her eyes asked, "What will you choose?" Veronica, I don't work for the company anymore, I said finally. This is Dwight and Lawrence's problem. Keith, please, I could hear the desperation in her voice. I understand how you feel, but there are hundreds of jobs at stake right now. You can hate Lawrence, but think about the people who could lose their jobs. I sighed. What exactly is happening now? The investors from Singapore are waiting on the line. The transaction should start in 20 minutes. Nexus is blocking the transaction due to a security parameter mismatch. Dwight's trying to reprogram the module, but the system won't accept changes without authorization. What does Lawrence say? Veronica snorted, yelling at everyone. He's threatening to fire half the technical department. He's in the conference room now, trying to calm the investors. I pictured the scene. Tense faces, employees running back and forth, Dwight frantically tapping away at his keyboard, Lawrence smiling strainedly at his Asian partners via video link. Let me talk to Dwight, I said finally. There was a murmur, voices in the background, then Dwight's voice. Mr. Mortimer? Oh, thank God. The system won't accept any changes. I tried to bypass the lockdown through administrative access, but what exactly did you do? I interrupted him. I tried to deactivate the transaction security check module. I figured I could disable it temporarily, make the transaction, and then deal with the code. I closed my eyes. Worst thing you could do. You were trying to disable the system's primary defense mechanism. Now it's gone into full lockdown mode. It's like the immune system. If you try to bypass it, it only strengthens the defenses. There's got to be a way. Dwight sounded desperate. Maybe you can give me the code. I looked at Gwen. She was listening to the conversation with a neutral expression, not pushing me to make a decision. Listen, Dwight, I said after a pause. The code changes every day. It's a combination of personal data and mathematical algorithms. It can't just be prompted. Then come here, he exclaimed. The company will pay any amount for the consultation. Lawrence has already approved it. Of course he has, I grinned, when I smelled something hot. Dwight's voice changed to Veronica's. Keith, it's 8:45. We have 15 minutes before the deal starts. What do we do? I took a deep breath. Nothing. The system did what it was designed to do. Protect the company from potentially dangerous transactions. Without the correct authorization code, it won't let a transaction of this magnitude through. But you can enter that code. Veronica's voice sounded desperate. A good technician can too. Dwight's a good technician, right? There are no passwords. And I corrected him. Yesterday. Today I am no longer an Axiom Capital employee, as I'd been made clear. There was silence. Then Veronica said quietly, I understand. I'm sorry to bother you. She disconnected. I looked at Gwen. You think I'm petty? I think you're a person who's been betrayed, she shrugged. Everyone is entitled to their feelings. The phone rang again. This time it was Lawrence. I didn't answer it. Let's go to breakfast. Gwen stood up. I made your favorite blueberry pancakes. We went down to the kitchen, and for a while I tried to forget about what was happening at Axiom Capital. We ate breakfast, discussing plans for the future. Maybe that trip to Europe we'd been dreaming of, or renovating the house, or just enjoying the free time, reading the books I'd been putting off for years, taking care of the garden. But thoughts involuntarily returned to the situation in the company. How are they coping? Did Dwight manage to find a solution? What would the investors say? At 10 o'clock, I couldn't stand it any longer and turned on my laptop. With my access codes, I could still see the general state of the system, although I couldn't make changes remotely. The Nexus control panel opened up on the monitor. All the indicators were glowing red. The system was in full lockdown mode. The last entry in the event log: attempted unauthorized disabling of security protocols. Emergency lockdown procedure activated. Dwight's only made it worse, I commented, showing the screen to Gwen. Now the system can only be unlocked physically from the main server. And you're the only one who knows how to do that? She asked. Why? A good technician can do it, I nodded. Or you have to completely reboot the system, which will take at least 12 hours. By then, the investors would definitely back out of the deal. Gwen looked at me carefully. You want to know what's going on in there now, don't you? I didn't say anything, but she was right. Professional curiosity and a 28-year habit of being in the center of events were taking their toll. Why don't you call Veronica? Gwen suggested it. Just to get the news. I shook my head. No. If I do, they'll start begging me to help again. I'd already made up my mind. My phone rang again. This time, the number was unrecognizable. I pressed reject. A minute later, the doorbell rang. Who could that be? Gwen wondered, heading for the door. I heard her surprised exclamation, then Veronica's voice. Hello, Mrs. Mortimer. I'm sorry to intrude, but I need to talk to Keith. I stepped out into the hallway. Veronica stood on the doorstep, pale, with circles under her eyes. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled. Can I come in? She asked. It's important. Gwen looked at me. I nodded. Come in. Gwen stepped aside. Would you like some coffee? Yes, please, Veronica nodded gratefully. Black, no sugar. We went into the living room. Veronica sank heavily into an armchair. The situation is critical, she said without preamble. The investors refused to wait and rescheduled the meeting for 14 hours. If the system isn't up and running by then, the deal will fall through. What about Dwight? I asked. Is he still trying to hack into the system? He gave up, Veronica shook her head. He admitted that he didn't understand the Nexus architecture well enough. Now he and the tech department are trying to reboot the entire system, but it's taking too long. And Lawrence? Veronica grinned bitterly, hysterical, yelling at everyone, threatening to fire him. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. The stock's already down 5%, and that's just the beginning. If this deal falls through, we're going to have a real meltdown. Gwen brought coffee and quietly walked out, leaving us alone. Why did you come here, Veronica? I asked bluntly. You know my position. She sipped her coffee and looked me in the eye. I know, and I understand your feelings, but I didn't come here to talk you into saving the company. Then why did you come? I wanted you to know the truth, she set the cup down, about why you were fired. I tensed up. I'd heard the official version. Restructuring, fresh eyes, and so on. That's a lie, Veronica shook her head. The real reason is much simpler and more trivial. Dwight is the nephew of the chairman's wife. He needed a prestigious position in the company, and your position was the best fit. You're almost retired, the system's stable. They thought the change would be painless. I felt a wave of anger rising inside. So, 28 years of work versus family ties, and they chose the latter? Exactly, Veronica nodded. Classic office politics. Nothing personal, just business. I stood up and walked to the window. This news should have increased my resentment, but in a strange way I felt relieved. At least it wasn't about my professionalism or age, just good old-fashioned corruption. Thanks for telling me, I turned to Veronica, but it doesn't change anything. I know, she stood up. I just wanted you to know the truth. You deserve it after all these years. Veronica finished her coffee and headed for the exit. I have to get back. I have to get ready for the disaster. She stopped at the door. You know what's ironic? Lawrence was bragging to the board yesterday about how the deal would give the company a new lease on life. He said that with Dwight they could take Axiom to the next level. And today— She didn't finish the sentence. When the door closed behind Veronica, I turned back to my laptop. The Nexus control panel was still showing red indicators. The event log was populated with new entries. Attempted forced system reboot. Access denied. Gwen sat down next to me. What do you think now? I don't know. I shook my head. On the one hand, nothing has changed. On the other, now I know it was just normal office politics. Not my job, not my age, just nepotism. And does that change anything for you? I hesitated. Probably. If I had been replaced by a really talented specialist, that would be one thing. But the chairman's wife's nephew— My phone rang again. Lawrence, for the third time this morning. I looked at the screen, then at Gwen. Answer it, she said. At least listen to what he has to say. I pressed the speaker button. Yes, Lawrence. Keith. His voice sounded unusually quiet. I need your help. Not the company, me personally. Really? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. What's the difference? The company will survive this crisis. We may have to sell some of our assets, reduce our staff, but Axiom will survive. But my career— He paused. If this deal falls through, the board of directors will fire me. 20 years of work down the drain. I kept quiet, letting him continue. I know what I did to you was unfair, Lawrence continued. You deserve better. But I'm not asking you to help me for the company's sake, but for the sake of our former friendship. Friendship? I snorted. Were we friends, Lawrence? Once upon a time, he sounded sincere. Remember our first success with the prediction system? How we celebrated all night in that bar on Main Street? How your Gwen taught me to dance? I looked at Gwen. She smiled, remembering that night. I remember, I said quietly. We really were a team then. What happened to us, Keith? Lawrence asked. When did things change? I sighed. When money and power became more important than people, Lawrence. When you began to see employees as functions rather than individuals. There was silence. Then Lawrence said quietly, You're right, and I deserve what's happening now. But a lot of people will suffer if this deal falls through. People who are not to blame for anything. I looked at my watch. 11:30. I had 2.5 hours before my meeting with the investors. What exactly do you want me to do, Lawrence? Come and unlock the system, he replied. We'll pay you as a consultant, any amount. It's not about money, I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. It's about principle. Then state your terms, Lawrence sounded desperate. What do you want? I hesitated a moment. What did I really want? Revenge, confession, an apology. You know, Lawrence, I said at last, I gave 28 years to this company, built a system that's made millions, and yesterday you threw me away like a used napkin for the nephew of the chairman's wife. You know, he started, but I interrupted. Yes, and you know what the most hurtful thing is? It's not that I was replaced. It's the way they did it. No respect for my years of service, no gratitude, no basic human decency. Lawrence was silent. So my answer is no, I continued. I'm not coming to save the company or your career. I'm out of the system, Lawrence, completely and utterly. This is Dwight's problem now. Keith, please. Goodbye, Lawrence. I pressed the disconnect button and turned to Gwen. Do you think I'm doing the right thing? She took my hand. It's your decision, Keith, and I'll support you either way. We spent the rest of the day at home, trying not to think about what was happening at Axiom Capital. I sorted through books I'd been putting off for years, Gwen cooked dinner. We discussed plans for the future, but my thoughts kept returning to the situation at the company. At 14 o'clock, I couldn't stand it any longer and turned on the financial news. The familiar Axiom Capital building appeared on the screen, with a ticker at the bottom. Axiom Capital shares plummet 15% amid rumors that a major deal with Asian investors had fallen through. The anchor narrated, "Unconfirmed reports say technical problems in Axiom Capital's system have led to the derailment of a deal with Eastern Investment Group worth about $100 million. Representatives of the company are refusing to comment, but sources inside the organization report a serious crisis. The company's stock is plummeting." I turned off the TV and looked at Gwen. That's it. The deal had fallen through. She sat down next to me and put her arm around my shoulders. "Are you sorry?" I thought about it. "No. I regret the people who might lose their jobs. But not about my decision. They made their choice. I made mine." My phone rang again. This time it was Veronica. I answered, "Yes? It's over." Her voice sounded tired. "The investors backed out of the deal. The stock is plummeting. The board of directors is calling for Lawrence's resignation." "And Dwight?" I asked. "Fired," Veronica hummed. "Turns out family ties only work when things are going well. As soon as they smelled something fishy, they got rid of him first." "So what now?" "Crisis management," she sighed. "Downsizing, selling off some assets, looking for new investors. If we're lucky, the company will survive, but in a severely diminished form." I was silent, digesting the information. "You know what's ironic?" Veronica continued. "The board of directors asked if they could bring you back. They offered double salary, shares in the company, a golden parachute. And what did you say?" "That you were already out of the system." I could hear the smile in her voice. "And that some decisions can't be undone." "Thank you, Veronica," I said sincerely, "for everything." "You're welcome," she said quietly. "By the way, I'm leaving too. I applied an hour ago." "Where?" "I haven't decided yet. Maybe I'll start my own consulting firm. I've been working for other people for too long." "Good luck," I smiled. "You deserve the best." "You too, Keith," she sighed. "You do too." We said our goodbyes and I put the phone down. Gwen looked at me questioningly. "It's over," I said. "The deal's off. The stock's going down. Lawrence will probably be fired." "And Dwight?" "Already fired," I chuckled. "The first casualty of the recession." Gwen shook her head. "It's a house of cards. One whiff and it all fell apart." "Yeah," I nodded. "That's right. The system I'd spent 28 years building collapsed in one day without the right code. And how do you feel?" Gwen looked at me carefully. I wondered. There was no joy from revenge, no bitterness from the collapse of my life's work. Just a strange sense of liberation. "You know," I said finally, "I feel like I'm finally truly out of the system. Not just out of the computer program, but out of the entire corporate machine that had defined my life for 28 years. Gwen smiled and hugged me tighter. "Welcome to freedom." I looked out the window where the sun was setting, coloring the sky orange. Somewhere out there, in the glass tower of Axiom Capital, careers and hopes were crumbling. But here, in this house, a new chapter of my life was beginning. And for the first time in years, the future seemed not daunting, but full of possibilities. It had been a week since the deal fell through. I began to get used to a new rhythm of life without morning meetings, calls in the middle of the night, and constant tension. I was waking up at 8 instead of 5:30, eating a leisurely breakfast, reading books I'd been putting off for years, tending to my garden. But a part of me was still attached to Axiom Capital. Every morning I looked at the financial news. The company had fallen on hard times. The stock was down 30%, Clients were canceling contracts one by one, and analysts were predicting, if not bankruptcy, then a major restructuring with mass layoffs. Reading about Axiom again? Gwen put a cup of coffee in front of me, looking at the laptop screen. Just curious, I shrugged. Keith, she sat down across from me. You've been monitoring every news story about the company for a week now. It's more than just interest. I sighed. It's hard to let go of 28 years of life. Do you miss work? Not the work, I shook my head. The feeling of doing something meaningful. The system I'd built from scratch. Gwen looked at me carefully. Do you feel guilty about what happened? I paused for a moment, thinking about the answer. Yes and no, I finally said. Part of me says they got what they deserved. The other part of me says that my decision could hurt people who were innocent. But you didn't make the decision to fire yourself the day before you retired, Gwen pointed out. You didn't replace an experienced professional with an untrained rookie before a critical deal. That's right, I nodded. But I knew what would happen if I didn't update the security settings, and I made a conscious decision not to do anything. That was your right, Gwen shrugged. You didn't work there anymore. Right, yes. I rubbed the bridge of my nose. But was it the right moral choice? That's what's bugging me. The doorbell rang before Gwen could answer. We looked at each other. Are you expecting someone? She asked. No, I stood up. I'll go look. When I opened the door, I froze in amazement. Lawrence Price stood on the doorstep, but this was not the confident CEO I had known all these years. In front of me was a gaunt man with bags under his eyes and 2 days' worth of stubble. His usually impeccable suit looked wrinkled and his hair was clearly graying. Hello, Keith, he said quietly. Can I come in? I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. Gwen stepped into the hallway and raised her eyebrows in surprise when she saw our guest. Hello, Mrs. Mortimer. Lawrence tried to smile, but it was unconvincing. I apologize for the intrusion. Come in. Gwen nodded. Would you like some coffee? If I may. He nodded gratefully. Black, no sugar. We went into the living room. Lawrence sank heavily into the chair, as if the last of his strength had left him. Why did you come? I asked, sitting down across from him. He looked me straight in the eye. To apologize and to ask for help. Apology accepted, I shrugged. As for help, it's too late. The deal's off. The system's locked down. What can I do? Restore the Nexus. Lawrence stepped forward. The system's still in lockdown mode. The tech department has rebooted it 3 times, but without the right codes, it refuses to work properly. We're losing customers every day. Gwen brought coffee and stealthily walked out, leaving us alone. And where is your prodigy? I asked with a touch of irony. Dwight Abbott, the future of the company. Lawrence wrinkled his nose. Fired. The same day the deal fell through. The board of directors demanded his head on a platter. Convenient, I chuckled. How about you? I'm hanging in there for now. He sipped his coffee. But the board gave me 2 weeks to fix the situation. If the Nexus doesn't work, I'll be fired too. I leaned back in my chair, staring at Lawrence. All these years I'd seen him as an unyielding leader, a man who always knew what to do. Now he was just a tired man in his 60s whose career was hanging by a thread. Why did you decide to replace me? I asked bluntly. The truth, Lawrence. No corporate fresh eyes nonsense. Lawrence sighed. It wasn't my idea. He set down his cup. The board of directors, or rather Chairman Richardson, insisted on promoting Dwight. I resisted for months, but finally relented. Why? Politics, he said. Dwight is Richardson's wife's nephew, and Richardson controls the majority of the board of directors. And you decided to sacrifice me for political games. I didn't ask, but asserted. Yes, Lawrence lowered his eyes. It was a mistake, I admit, but I had no choice. There is always a choice, I shook my head. You could have taken my side. You could have explained that replacing an experienced CTO before a big deal was a risk. You could have at least postponed the decision for a couple months. Lawrence was silent. But you didn't, I continued. You took the path of least resistance. You decided that the Nexus would work without me, and that Richardson was best left alone. I underestimated the complexity of the system, Lawrence admitted, and I overestimated Dwight's abilities. Not only that, I looked him in the eye, you underestimated the human element. You thought a technician was just a function that could be replaced, like a part in a machine. Lawrence sighed. You're right, and I'm paying the price for that. We were silent for a moment. It was raining outside the window, the drops drumming on the glass, creating a strangely soothing rhythm. How bad are things at the company? I asked finally. Lawrence rubbed his face with his palms. Worse than it looks. That deal. It wasn't just important. It was a lifeline. What do you mean? For the last 2 years, the company had been losing ground in the market, Lawrence said quietly, as if confessing something shameful. New players with aggressive marketing and innovative approaches were pulling customers away. We were hanging on by our old contracts and reputation, but things were getting worse every quarter. And the Asian deal was supposed to fix that? Yes, he nodded. It wasn't just acquiring a controlling stake in a technology company in Singapore. It was a strategic partnership that would give us access to Asian markets and new technologies. We would not only get the money, but also the innovation we were sorely lacking. Why didn't you tell me this before? I frowned. If the situation was that serious. Pride. Lawrence grinned bitterly. I didn't want to admit that the ship was sinking. Tried to solve the problems myself without attracting attention. I thought the deal would fix everything, and no one would ever know how close we were to collapse. I shook my head. And for that, you decided to replace me with an inexperienced rookie right before a critical deal. Like I said, it was a mistake. Lawrence looked up at me with tired eyes. I thought the system was stable enough to work without you for at least a few days. And then, we'd offer you a consultant contract if there was a problem. Convenient, I grinned, throwing a man overboard and then hoping he'd come back to save the sinking ship. Lawrence was silent, staring at the floor. How many people will lose their jobs if the company doesn't get out of this crisis? I asked after a pause. At best, about 150, he answered. At worst, all 600 employees. I stood up and went to the window. The rain had intensified, turning our neat garden into a blurry patch of green behind the glass. Contradictory feelings struggled inside me. Resentment for the betrayal, satisfaction that justice had been served, but also regret for the people who might suffer. What exactly do you want from me, Lawrence? I asked without turning around. Go back and rebuild the system, he answered. At least as a consultant, on your terms. Any pay, any schedule. I turned to him. What if I refuse? Then the company probably wouldn't survive, Lawrence said. At least not in its current form. It might be bought by competitors for nothing. Maybe they'll just sell it off piecemeal. And you'll be fired. It's a done deal, he nodded. The only question is whether I'll leave with minimal damage to my reputation or as a captain who sank the ship. I sat back in my chair. Why should I help you? After what you did to me? Not for me. Lawrence shook his head. For the people who work there. For the system you've spent 28 years building. For yourself, after all. For myself? I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Yes, he nodded. So you wouldn't regret it. To know that you did the best you could, even when others failed you. I thought about it. There was some truth in what he said. Part of me did worry about the fate of the company and the people I'd worked with for so many years. You know what the ironic thing is? I finally said. If you had just let me work until retirement, none of this would have happened. I would have groomed a successor, explained all the nuances of the system, created complete documentation. I know, Lawrence lowered his head. It was my biggest mistake. Not just yours, I shook my head. Mine too. I created a system that was completely dependent on one person, failed to document critical processes, left loopholes and secret codes. It was unprofessional of me. You were protecting yourself, Lawrence countered. And, as it turned out, for good reason. We were silent again. The rain was beginning to subside outside the window, and the first rays of sunlight were breaking through the clouds. I'll think about your proposal, I said at last, but I can't promise anything. Lawrence nodded. That's all I ask. Just, don't take too long. We're running out of time. He finished his coffee and stood up. Thank you for listening. I'm sorry, Keith, for everything. I walked him to the door. Lawrence stopped at the door. You know what I've realized this week? A company isn't buildings or assets or even customers. It's people. And when you forget that, everything starts to fall apart. When the door closed behind him, Gwen came out into the hallway. Did you hear everything? I asked. Yes, she nodded. What are you going to do? I sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants to help, not for Lawrence, but for the people who work there. The other part says they created this situation on their own, and it's not my problem. Gwen put her arm around me. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. We went back to the living room. I sat down at my laptop and opened the Nexus control panel. To my surprise, the remote access was still working. The system was showing numerous errors and warnings. The tech department had tried rebooting it several times, but without the right security keys, it was only making things worse. They're doing it all wrong, I muttered, looking through the event log. Each recovery attempt only drives the system deeper into defense mode. Can you fix it? Gwen asked, looking over my shoulder. Not remotely, I shook my head. You need physical access to the main server and my security keys, so you'd have to go back to the office. Yeah, I closed the laptop, if I decide to help. Gwen sat down next to me. What's stopping you? I was quiet for a moment, gathering my thoughts. You know, it's not even about resentment. I'm just out of the system, mentally, emotionally. Let it go. And going back there, even for a day. You're afraid to go back into it? She looked at me carefully. Maybe, I shrugged. Or afraid that I won't be able to help anymore, that it's too late. Gwen took my hand. Keith, in all the years I've known you, you've always done the right thing, even when it was hard, even when no one saw it. And what's the right thing now? Only you can decide that, she smiled. But think about this. 10 years from now, what will be more important? That you avenged an injustice, or that you helped people when you could? I thought about her words. There was deep truth in them. Revenge might bring temporary satisfaction, but it left a bitter taste. Helping, even those who didn't deserve it, gave a different feeling. The realization that you had stayed true to yourself, to your principles. The phone rang, interrupting my musings. Veronica Stein. Yes, I answered it. Keith, her voice sounded strained. Lawrence said he spoke to you. Have you agreed to help? I haven't decided yet, I answered. And what's going on with you? Complete chaos, Veronica sighed. The board of directors has gathered for an emergency meeting. They're discussing options for selling the company. Clients are breaking contracts one by one. The system is still down. What about you? Still planning on leaving? Just for a little while, she hummed. I want to make sure people are compensated if it comes to mass layoffs. I smiled. Veronica had always been principled. You know, she continued, I'm not going to talk you into this. You have every right to refuse after what's been done to you. But if you do decide to help, a lot of people would be grateful. I'll think about it, I replied. I promise. We said goodbye, and I turned to Gwen. I think it's worse than Lawrence said. The board of directors is already discussing the sale of the company. "And what have you decided?" she asked. I took a deep breath. When I created Nexus, I dreamed of a system that would be reliable, stable, useful, one that would outlive me, one that I could be proud of. And now it's up to you to decide, Gwen finished for me. Yes, I nodded. It was ironic. I stood up and walked over to the bookshelf where there was a picture of the entire Axiom Capital Development Department taken about 10 years ago. Young faces, smiles, hopes for the future. Many of these people still worked for the company. "I can't go back for good," I said without turning around. "I can't be part of this system again. But maybe I can help them create a new one, a better one." Gwen walked over and stood next to me. "This sounds like a compromise you can live with." I nodded. "Yes, I'll help rebuild the system, but on my terms, and it will be my last contribution to Axiom Capital, my point of no return." "So you'll call Lawrence?" "Yes," I smiled. "But not now. Let him worry a little. It's not revenge, just a lesson." Gwen laughed and hugged me. "That's why I married you. You know how to forgive, but you don't forget to teach a lesson." I hugged her back, feeling the weight of the last few days finally recede. I had made a decision I could live with. Not perfect, not heroic, but human. And maybe that's what I'd been missing all these years in the corporate world. Simple humanity. I parked my car in front of a small office building in Boston's business district. 3 months later, I still hadn't gotten used to my new status as a free man, the master of my own time. I woke up early every morning, as was my old habit, but then smilingly remembered that I could afford another hour in bed. Most of the time, however, I got up anyway and went to work on my projects. Today's meeting was special. Veronica had invited me to the opening of her new company, Stein Analytics. I adjusted my tie, not too strict but businesslike enough, and got out of the car. The last 3 months had been tumultuous for everyone associated with Axiom Capital. After my visit to the office and the restoration of the Nexus system, the company had gotten a temporary reprieve, but that hadn't saved it from major changes. Lawrence Price, as expected, had been forced to resign. The last time I saw him was at a televised press conference where he announced his decision to devote more time to his family, the standard wording for a forced resignation. There was a mixture of relief and bitterness in his eyes. As far as I knew, he was now consulting for several startups, but the big companies were slow to offer him management positions. Dwight Abbott was even less fortunate. After the high-profile failure with Nexus, his reputation in the financial technology industry was severely damaged. He was rumored to have left for the West Coast, where he tried to make a fresh start at a mid-tier tech company. Family ties, as it turned out, only worked within the confines of one company and one board of directors. As for Axiom Capital itself, the company went through a major restructuring. Half of its divisions had been sold to competitors, its staff reduced by a third. It now existed on a much more modest scale, focusing only on a few key areas. I walked up to the 5th floor of a modern glass and concrete building. Glass doors bearing the Stein Analytics logo led to a spacious, bright office. Veronica met me in the reception area. "Keith," she smiled, extending her hand. "Glad you could make it." She looked younger and more energized than the last time I'd seen her in Axiom's office. Her austere business suit had been replaced by a more modern and stylish outfit, and there was something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years, real enthusiasm. "I couldn't miss it," I shook her hand. "You look beautiful. Freedom's obviously good for you." "It's good for you too," she nodded. "It's like you've lost 10 years. Let me give you a tour." The office was organized as an open space, but with separate areas for meetings and quiet work. About 20 people worked at computers, many of whom I recognized as former Axiom Capital employees. "You poach the best," I remarked as we passed the technical department. Not poached, but saved, Veronica corrected me. When it became clear that Axiom would be downsizing, I offered jobs to those I considered valuable. We went into her office, a small but cozy room overlooking the Charles River. There were charts and graphs on the walls and a photo of the Stein Analytics team on the desk, a recent one by the looks of it. "Have a seat," Veronica pointed to the chair across from her desk. "Coffee?" "With pleasure," I nodded. "Black, no sugar." She pressed a button on the intercom and ordered, then sat down across from me. "So, how's the pension working out for you?" she asked with a slight smile. "You could hardly call it a pension," I grinned. "I work just as hard as I used to. It's just that now I'm working for myself instead of the corporation." "What are you working on?" "A new data analysis system," I shrugged. "Something like Nexus, but more modern, more open and flexible." Veronica looked at me carefully. "That's what I wanted to talk to you about. But first, tell me how you rebuilt the system in Axiom. I've only heard general phrases." I smiled, remembering that day. It was interesting. When I got to the office, there was real panic. The technical department was trying to reboot the system for the fourth time, but it was only making things worse. Lawrence was flitting between the board and the investors, trying to calm everyone down. "And Dwight?" Veronica asked. "He was gone." I shook my head. "He'd been fired before I got there. It took me about 3 hours to restore all the security settings and get the system back up and running. It took another 2 days to create detailed documentation and to train the technical department in all the nuances." There was a knock on the door and an assistant brought coffee. When we were alone again, Veronica continued, "And you didn't leave any secret codes this time?" "No," I shook my head. "Everything is transparent. Everything is documented. I realize that creating systems with secret loopholes is not only unprofessional but also dangerous for the system itself." "A wise decision," Veronica nodded. "And that brings me to the purpose of our meeting." She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder of documents. "Stein Analytics specializes in financial analysis and consulting for medium and large companies," she began. "We've already signed contracts with several former Axiom clients and are expanding aggressively. But we need our own analytical system, something similar to Nexus, but more modern and flexible." "And you want me to build it?" I guessed. "Yes," she nodded, "but not as an employee, as a partner." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "Partner?" "A full partner in the company." Veronica slid a folder toward me. 20% of the shares, a seat on the board of directors, full creative freedom to develop the system. I opened the folder and quickly looked through the documents. The terms were more than generous, not only a stake in the company, but also a serious development budget, a team of technical specialists under my command, and the opportunity to work remotely most of the time. "Sounds tempting," I admitted, "but why me? Boston is full of young and talented developers." Veronica smiled. "For 3 reasons. First, you're the best at what you do, and that's not a compliment, it's a fact. Secondly, you know the financial market from the inside, you understand the needs of analysts and traders. And third," she paused, "I trust you. And after everything that happened at Axiom, trust is the most important thing to me." I sipped my coffee, mulling over her words. The offer was really attractive. Over the past 3 months, I'd realized I wasn't cut out for complete inactivity. I enjoyed working on the new system, but on my own it was more of a hobby project than something serious. "I appreciate the offer, Veronica," I said finally. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window at the Charles River. Boats glided through the water, people strolled along the waterfront. Life went on, despite the corporate dramas and personal disappointments. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "I've been thinking a lot the last 3 months about what happened at Axiom, about loyalty, betrayal, professional ethics." "And what conclusions have you come to?" Veronica asked. "That loyalty should be mutual," I turned to her. that professionalism is more important than office politics, and that sometimes you have to leave one system to create a better one. Veronica nodded. Wise conclusions. And that's exactly the kind of company I want to build. I went through the documents again. It says the system should be ready for testing in 6 months. Is that a realistic time frame? You're the expert, she shrugged. If more time is needed, we can discuss. No, I shook my head. 6 months is quite enough. I already have the basic architecture and some components. With a good team, we can do it. Veronica glowed. So you're accepting the offer? I smiled. Yes, I think it will be interesting for us to work together on equal terms as partners. We shook hands, sealing the agreement. Shall we drink to that? Veronica suggested, taking a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses out of the locker. I was saving this for a special occasion. I'd love to, I nodded. She filled the glasses and raised hers. To the new chapter, to Stein Analytics and our future system. To a new chapter, I touched my glass to hers. And to the lessons of the past that make us stronger. We drank, and I felt a pleasant warmth inside, not only from the champagne but also from the feeling that life was really turning over a new leaf. Do you want to meet the team? Veronica asked. Many will be glad to see you. Sure, I stood up. But first I want to show you something. I took a laptop out of my briefcase, opened it, and started the program. This is a prototype of a new system, I explained, turning the screen toward Veronica. I've named it Open Horizon. Watch. An elegant interface appeared on the screen with lots of charts and graphs, but organized much more intuitively than in the Nexus. This is amazing. Veronica leaned closer, studying the data. Much more intuitive than the Nexus. And that color scheme. The system automatically adapts the colors to the user's perception, I explained. There's also a built-in learning system that adapts to the way each analyst works. And security? Veronica asked. It's multi-layered, I nodded, but no secret codes or hidden functions. Everything is transparent, everything is documented. I opened another tab showing the structure of the code. Look, there's full documentation here, not just technical specifications, but explanations of operating principles, decision-making logic, even the history of each component's creation. Veronica studied the screen with undisguised admiration. This is not just an improved Nexus, it's a whole new approach. Exactly, I nodded. In Axiom, I created a system that was efficient but closed. Now I want to create something that will not only work, but also evolve with the users, learn from them. I closed my laptop. This is just the beginning. With your team, we can do much more. We left Veronica's office and headed towards the open space where the employees were working. When we emerged, several people noticed me and smiled. Tom Jenkins, Axiom's former senior analyst, approached first. Mr. Mortimer, good to see you. So the rumors are true? Are you joining us? Yes, Tom, I shook his hand. We'll work together on the new system. That's great. He's glowing. Frankly, after what happened with the Nexus, I realized how important it was to have the right people at the helm of technology. Gradually, a small group gathered around us, former Axiom colleagues and new employees I didn't know. Veronica introduced me to everyone as the new partner and head of technology. Mr. Mortimer will be leading the development of our proprietary analytics system, she announced. Many of you know him from his work at Axiom Capital, where he built Nexus, but what we're building here will be even better. I looked around at the faces. Young and energetic, experienced and thoughtful. These people trusted me, valued my experience. There were no corporate games and behind-the-scenes intrigue, only professionalism and a common goal. I'm glad to be part of this team, I said, and I promise that this time we will create a system that we can all be proud of. Open, honest, documented, and yet more powerful than anything you've seen before. After meeting with the team, Veronica walked me to the exit. "When do you want to officially start?" she asked. "I've already started," I smiled. "I'll send you a work plan for the next month tonight, and on Monday we'll have our first meeting with the technical team." We stopped at the exit of the building. "You know, Keith," Veronica looked at me seriously, "when everything happened with Axios, I was afraid that you would completely withdraw from the profession, that the resentment and disappointment would outweigh the love of the job." "That's what I thought at first," I admitted. "But then I realized that leaving one system is not the end, but the beginning of something new, and that real professionalism is not about clinging to the past, but about creating the future." Veronica smiled. "Philosopher, but I'm glad you've come to that conclusion." We shook hands goodbye, and I headed for my car. It was a clear, sunny day, perfect for new beginnings. 3 months ago, I had left the system that had betrayed me after 28 years of service. Today, I was entering a new system as an equal partner, as a valued professional whose expertise was recognized and respected. As I sat behind the wheel, I pulled a small flash drive out of my pocket, all my work over the past 3 months, the basis for the future system. Not perfect, not finished, but honest and open. A system that would evolve with people, not control them. I started the engine and pulled onto the road, heading home, where Gwen was already waiting to hear about the results of the meeting. On the way, I reflected on the strange irony of life. Sometimes you have to lose what you think is most important in order to find something truly valuable. 28 years in the service, 1 day of betrayal, 3 months of reflection, and now a new chapter. Not just a continuation of an old story, but a whole new narrative. And this time, I wasn't just a character, but a co-author. I smiled at my thoughts. The system I had so dramatically exited had led me back to the system I had happily entered. The circle had closed, but it was not a vicious circle of repetition, but a spiral of development. Each spiral, higher, freer, wiser. In the evening, sitting in my home office at my computer, I opened the code editor and began working on the details of Open Horizon. Lines of commands appeared on the screen, clean, logical, documented. I had a notebook lying next to me where I jotted down ideas and notes to incorporate into the overall documentation. Gwen peeked into the office with a cup of tea. "How's it going?" "Great," I smiled, accepting the cup. "You know, for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I should be doing. Not just doing a job, but creating something of real value." She kissed the top of my head. "I'm proud of you. You could have gotten angry, you could have withdrawn into yourself. But instead, you found a way to turn a bitter experience into something positive." I looked at the screen where a new system was taking shape. More open, more honest, more human. A system that would serve people, not control them. A system that would outlive me, not because of secret codes and hidden functions, but because of its transparency and usefulness. "In the end," I said, returning to my work, "the most important system is not a computer program, but the relationship between people. And if that system is based on mutual respect and recognition, the rest will follow." Gwen smiled and quietly walked out, leaving me alone with the code. I worked late into the night, but I didn't feel tired, only excitement and clarity of purpose. A new chapter had really begun, and I was ready to write it in a way I could be proud of.